no good to get into. And here today we're going to start out by talking about where he went and the things that he could have gotten himself into in the situation. A lot of good information here that we've been talking about with the information that Solomon is giving us, and a lot of good examples of what not to do. So before we go any further, I'd like for Brother Kenny, if he would, to lead our minds in prayer.
Dear God, we want to thank you for allowing us to have another precious day to assemble here. We want to thank you for watching over us, keeping us safe. We want to ask that you be with Brother Dave as he brings the word to us so we can learn from him. And in your son's name we pray. For Jesus' name.
All right, so let's look here at verse 8. It says, passing through the street near her corner, and he went the way to her house. Now this continues Solomon's description of how reckless actions contrary to godly wisdom can result in disaster. And Solomon describes a foolish young man walking along the street near a corner where a predatory woman lives. You know, when I was studying this, I remember something from my very, very, very young youth. My grandfather had a produce business on the corner of 7th Street and 2nd Avenue, where the Civic Center sits now. And around the corner, there was a couple of houses. And I was probably maybe 3 or 4, and I kind of wandered out of they had a big open door in the front. I kind of wandered out to the front and kind of walked around the building. And this one house kind of caught my eye. And because there was 2 things that kind of caught my eye. Number one, it had a public phone thing on it. And the other thing, there were cakes and stuff sitting out on the porch. I thought that was pretty neat. Well, I didn't get to watch it very long because my mom noticed that I was missing, and she came around the corner and saw me in front of this house and about jerked my arm off, trying to get me back away from it. Well, I didn't quite understand it then, but in later years, it was kind of explained to me that that was Molly Robertson's house. And Molly had a cat house right there. And she had quite a reputation. And there was a reason that my mom wanted me away from that place, because there was no good going on in there. And Molly was an interesting woman. When I was a paramedic at the fire department, she was still alive, and she was in a wheelchair then. She was up in her 90s. And she would still run up and down the street on 8th Avenue, just causing all kinds of problems. But she had quite a reputation in Huntington, and some of it good and some of it kind of bad. But she was advertising what she was doing. I later was explained to me that public phone sign was kind of an indication. Couldn't put up a sign that says cat house, so you put up a sign that says public phone, and that kind of lets everybody who's looking for that kind of trouble to know where to get into it. So anyway, instead of passing by her corner, he turned down the street that led to her house. And apparently he intentionally wanted to visit her, perhaps thinking that she would satisfy his lust and show him a good time. But he was foolish and did exactly the opposite of what Solomon had counseled back in the 5th chapter in verse 8. Keep far away from her and do not go near the door of her house. So in 1 Thessalonians 5:22, it admonishes believers to abstain from every form of evil. And that's obviously what this young man was not abiding to. So instead of putting ourselves at risk by seeing how close to evil we can come without participating in it, we need to stay as far away as possible from the evil. So the young man Solomon observed drawing near the adulteress's house should have maintained a straight course away from the problem and away from the house. So instead he purposely headed into danger. So we see here that Solomon's judgment that he was foolish was a good observation that he was making. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 9. in the twilight, in the evening of the day, in the middle of the night, and in the darkness. So Solomon sees the foolish young man move toward the adulterous woman under the cover of darkness. And people may not be able to see him going there, but God is going to see him going there. And it's kind of funny that a lot of the situations like this, it happens at night. And people kind of look around, don't want to make sure that they don't see anybody going into these cat houses and stuff like this. So darkness seems to be the preferred time for illicit affairs and criminal activities. And one of the things people talk about is they say, well, a lot of stuff doesn't happen in this area. Let me tell you something. Everything that goes on in New York City goes on in this area, just on a smaller scale. And a lot of the stuff, it happens at night, and it happens when the people at the newspaper, they're asleep, and the people at the TV stations, they're asleep. They don't see all this stuff.
Well, I get to work at 4:30 in the morning, and so I do see it. And I've made the observation many times as I drive to work. I say, if you're walking around the streets at 4:30 in the morning, number one, you either made a lot of bad choices, or you made a lot of mistakes, or you're getting ready to make mistakes, or you're
Getting ready to, that's right.
and it's an observation, and I continue to believe that.
And that's absolutely, that's absolutely true. The stuff that goes on, and they've cleaned it up a little bit, but it's still, if you want to do it, it's there for you to do. And as Huntington has gotten smaller, the clientele has gotten a little bit smaller too, and you maybe don't see it as much as you used to. And with urban renewal, we've tore down the Hazleton, we've tore down the Biltmore, and we've tore down the Milner, and a lot of those places were pretty bad, for prostitution. But it's still out there. It's still out there.
Darkness has always been seen as, the side of evil.
Right.
Because, even God talks about casting the outer darkness.
Right.
The Hadean world
It's dark.
dark.
Right.
In the absence of God, there's no light.
Right.
So it's always been that terminology.
Right. So in the scriptures, darkness represents sin, and that's what we're talking about here. So Jesus said, and this is the judgment: the light has come into the world, and people love the darkness rather than the light, because their works were evil. For everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his work should be exposed. That's John 3:19 and 20. However, the darkness cannot hide sinners and their evil practices from the all-seeing eyes of God. And the psalmist credits God with seeing him as clearly at night as he does during the day. God's got that night vision that that we would like to have, or we get artificially with night vision glasses that you can kind of see through the situation. He wrote in Psalms 139, 11, and 12, "If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you, the night is as bright as day, for darkness is as light to you." And that's the psalmist talking about, God seeing through the darkness. In Proverbs 7:10 through 23, describes an adulterous and aggressive, seductive, though speaking to his son. Solomon's lessons here are met for all people. And this passage is part of Solomon's teaching about the dangers of sin and temptation. And the prior passages spoke of a reckless youth who now suffers the consequences of his choices. So we're going into a new section here where he's going into a little bit more detail about this. So the woman in the story takes advantage of the young man's lust and carelessness, and Solomon compares the trap she springs to those used to capture an ox, a deer, and a bird. So let's look at verse 10. "And behold, there met him a woman with the attire of a harlot and wily heart." So in this passage, Solomon spoke of things that he observed which had led to his wise advice. And one thing he has seen is the reckless actions of a youth who doesn't follow godly advice. And in this case, Solomon depicts a young man who is willing to put himself in the path of temptation from a predatory woman. Dressed in deliberately suggestive clothes, she sees the foolish young man drawing near her house, and eager for sin, she runs to meet him. If you go to the right places around here, you can tell who the prostitutes are just simply by the way that they dress. And it's kind of interesting to see the different techniques and styles and the way that they do things. There's some of them that are streetwalkers. They walk up and down the street, and then you'll get some that they'll hang out in the lobbies of the hotels, and they'll do that. Then of course you've got the high price ones that you have to rent, I guess, by the hour. Situations like that. So but if you go around and you pay close attention, you can see who these people are. And unfortunately, it's not just women. There's men prostitutes around here too. And it's a very sad situation. So she may have painted her eyes and adorned her hair with the intent of making herself attractive to a victim, as wicked Jezebel did in 2 Kings 9:30. And the woman in this example is married. She's not a streetwalker prostitute. She is a married woman, but she is unfaithful. We're going to talk about that as we go along. And she is also crafty and knows how to seduce her victim. She's doing this on purpose. She sees what she wants, and now she's starting to go after it. And God categorically condemns all forms of sexual sin. In Ephesians 5:5 states, "For you may be sure of this, that everyone who is sexually immoral or impure, or who covetous, that is, an adulterer, has no inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God." So it's significant that Babylon, the evil world system of the end times, is referred to as being sexually immoral. That's one of the things that that gets people into that situation. And it is said that the kings of the earth committed sexual immorality with her. And we see that when we study the Revelation in chapter 18, verses 1 through 3. Now, like Jezebel of old, Babylon will experience a fatal fall. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verses 11 and 12. "She is clamorous and willful. Her feet abide not in her house. Now she is in the streets, now in the broad places, and lieth in wait at every corner." So Solomon further describes a sin-seeking woman who preys on a foolish man as loud. She's there making a scene. She wants to be seen. And got to tell you another little story. Back when the old Holiday Inn downtown closed, it became the convention center. And there was a lot of stuff that went on in that place. There was high stakes gambling, and there was a lot of prostitution. And we got a call down there for a little lady of the evening that had fallen on the ice in the parking garage. And when we got there was no question who the problem was, because you could hear her outside when we were coming in, her in there, she was going to do this and she was going to do that. And I mean, you could tell by one look at her what she was. And she was pretty loud. We got her kind of out of the way of everybody because she was really making a scene. But then the boss showed up, and he took care of the situation real quick. There wasn't a whole lot of talking after the boss got there. He told her to get back to work, basically, is what he told her to, told her to do. But this is what they do. They're loud because they want to be seen. And in the context, this is more than simply a reference to her voice or her personality. This is a commentary on her willingness to celebrate her sin rather than to be ashamed of it. She's proud of what she's doing. And as with similar lessons in the book of Proverbs, the imagery presented depicts a woman seducing a man, but the principles apply equally to both sexes. Men can do the same thing as women do. And many of the principles also apply more broadly to the seductive nature of sin of any kind, not just of adultery. Sin is out there, and it's attractive, and it's there to lure us into situations that we should not be lured into. Now, the prostitute Solomon describes is anything but a devoted wife. And we can read a little bit more about that in Proverbs 31. And in Proverbs 31, it extols the virtues of a wife who is industrious and attentive to the needs of her household. This is the absolute opposite of the woman that's described in Proverbs 31. The prostitute refers to, to street and nightlife. And this is the time when a lot of this stuff takes place. And her feet will not stay at home, Solomon says. Paul warns Timothy about younger widows whose passions draw them away from Christ. We can read about that in 1 Timothy 5 and 11. So they become idlers going about from house to house, and not only idlers, but also gossips and busybodies, saying what they should not be saying. So they're not only are they doing things that they shouldn't be doing, but they're also saying things that they shouldn't be doing. So although Paul doesn't accuse them of prostitution, it's clear that rejection of one's family life or personal responsibilities can obviously lead to trouble. So the seductive woman, possibly a prostitute, goes from street to market to every corner in a predatory search for clients. She is wanton, I guess, is what we would maybe say. So Solomon says here that she lies in wait. She's kind of like a spider web, looking for somebody to walk into the web and get caught in the deal. So this expression characterizes her as a savage animal who lies in wait for unsuspecting prey to pounce and devour. And the foolish young man does not realize the danger which is about to engulf him. He's just wandering around behind the little animals, and he's just going to walk right into this situation, not paying any real attention. So like an unwary animal, he steps into the path of a savage attacker. And the use of these various terms also imply that such temptations can be almost anywhere, and they're not always found in obvious situations. And that's one of the things where the wisdom and the understanding comes in, is you can look through and you can see that this is not a situation that you want to get into, even though it looks like a good situation. So these are sin-seeking actions echoed those of the devil himself. The devil, this is a type of situation that the devil tries to get people into. He travels around the earth in search of victims those who will fall for his temptations. And the Apostle Peter warned believers to be sober-minded and watchful. You got to be paying attention to what's going on, and things are not always as they seem. So your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking to devour. 1 Peter 1, 5 and 8. And if the foolish young man were not roaming the streets, he would not have encountered this seductive woman. If he didn't put himself in that situation, we wouldn't be having the discussion that we're having now. So it's been said that if you don't want to eat bitter fruit, stay out of the devil's orchard. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verses 13 and 14. So he caught him and kissed him, and with an impudent face she said unto him, sacrifices of peace offerings are with me. This day I have paid my vows. Now Solomon has been depicting the way careless youth fall prey to adultery, describing a senseless person taken in by a predatory seductress. And the adulterous woman grabs the foolish young man and gives him a big old kiss, and he's thinking, wow, this is great. But it's not great. She's springing the trap right here. She speaks with him with a brazen face. Thus, she springs the trap that she has set for him. And while the moral guidelines given here are meant for both sexes, men, especially young men, can be particularly vulnerable to sudden temptations such as these. And such an approach is a deliberate strategy to ensnare victims. When a tempting situation arises, it is wise to recognize the danger and escape and even flee. Again, there's where the wisdom and the understanding comes in and the experience comes in, that you don't get yourself in this situation. And, you know, if you have to, run in the other direction. A famous example of aggressive seduction happened to the patriarch Joseph. When in Egypt, he was sexually assaulted by his employer's wife, and she continually enticed Joseph to lie with her, and he constantly refused. And then, like a prostitute, Solomon describes Potiphar's wife caught Joseph by his garment and urged him to have relations with him. She went out and grabbed him and tried to drag him into the bedroom, whatever. But Joseph was committed to the Lord and responded decisively to the master's wife by leaving his garment in her hand and fleeing from the house. You know, you can take that the way you want. It sounds like he just took off running. Maybe he lost a piece of his garment on the way. But the point is, he recognized the problem and he did something about it. He ran in the other direction. We can read about that in Genesis 39, 7 through 13. So Joseph's steadfast resistance to temptation, this infuriated Potiphar's wife. She was not a happy camper. She wanted Joseph in the worst way, and he wasn't going to play her game. So she lied about him to Potiphar, who promptly cast Joseph into prison. However, the Lord honors those who refuse temptation, and he here, of course, honored Joseph. And in time, Joseph was freed from prison and elevated to second in command over the entire nation. We can read about this in Genesis 41, 39 through 45. So Solomon quotes the words of a woman aggressively seeking to seduce a young man, and her reference to sacrifices and vows probably refer to temple offerings where some of the meat would be taken home. And the prospect of a fine meal is part of the experience she uses to tempt the reckless youth. We're going to have dinner, and then we're going to have whatever. Or we're not going to have dinner in a movie, we're going to have dinner in something else. Okay? So the other lure is a brazen invitation to sexual sin. Perhaps the adultery-minded woman felt her offerings and vows had settled the score with God, and now she could embark on a new round of sins. In other words, she got the old stuff taken care of. Now she's going to go out and do some more sin because she thinks she's made herself right with God because she went to church services that day. So, or she offered these sacrifices to some pagan deity, which is probably more correct. Regardless, she was ready to lure the foolish young man into adultery. And even if the sacrifices offered were part of Israel's temple worship, her display of piety was hypocritical. She was just going through the motions to make everybody think that she was a good person. She simply wanted to appear religious. How many people are there out there that just want to appear religious? And, you know, they go to church, they do all the right things, but then in the darkness, they do things that aren't so right. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 15. Therefore I came forth to meet thee, diligently to seek thy face, and I have found thee. So using aggressive and seductive dress, the predatory woman is seducing the reckless young man. And this is part of a lesson that Solomon is teaching about the dangers of adultery. The combination of alluring clothing and flattery will soon continue with outright invitation to illicit sex. She's dressed right, she's saying the right things to get what she wants. So such words are temptations not only for the body but also for the young man's pride, to think that such a pretty woman would desire him enough to search for him. Man, you talk about going for the ego. Right here's what she's doing. She's playing this young man's ego against him. As do many seducers of both sexes, this woman's plan is to use surprise, temptation, and flattery to trap the victim. And soon his pride will cause him to plummet into the depths of ruin. And flattery is a powerful tool in the devil's arsenal. You know, people say, well, flattery will get you nowhere. Well, a lot of times flattery will get you a lot of places. And you know, flattering people is a way to persuade them to do something that may be good or may be evil. So although the Bible tells us do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in your power to do it, heaping undeserved praise on someone can easily give him a false sense of pride and self-confidence. You know, here's this young guy, probably kind of inexperienced, and this beautiful, experienced woman is chasing after him and telling him what a great guy he is, and just drawing him right into the web of deception that she's trying to get him into. In Romans 12:3, the Apostle Paul warns, "For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment." You know, don't flatter yourself. You know, be realistic to what the situation is. And, you know, because getting yourself puffed up about something can get you in a lot of trouble in a lot of different ways. In Proverbs 16:18 predicts pride goeth before destruction and haughty spirit before a fall. I mean, that's solid advice right there. You know, I'm sure everybody knows people that are legends in their own mind. And those are the people that, you know, a lot of times get themselves in trouble, or more often can get you in trouble. So you've got to be able to discern and have wisdom and understanding, and be able to see through people that are like this. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verses 16 and 17. I have spared my couch with carpets of tapestry, with the striped clothes of yarn of Egypt. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh and aloes and cinnamon. So as part of her scheme to seduce a careless young man, the predatory woman begins to describe her bedroom in very alluring terms. And though she describes as luxurious and attractive, it presents nothing but death and ruin for those who fall into the trap. It looks good on paper, and it sounds really good. And, you know, once you get in there, though, what goes on in there is going to lead to nothing but death and destruction.
Also mysterious. That's another word used for that.
Yeah, she's, you know, wanting it to look really good. So it's typical of the devil and his followers to depict something evil and offensive to God as attractive and inviting. And although Joshua told the Israelites that Jericho and its contents were devoted to the Lord for destruction, and they were to keep themselves from things devoted to destruction, you know, Achan disobeyed, and he confessed, I have sinned against the Lord of Israel, and this is what I did when I saw among the spoils a beautiful cloak from Shinar, and 200 shekels of silver, and a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels. Then I coveted them and took them. So what he saw was very desirable, but it cost him his life. And we can read about this in Joshua 7:22 through 26. And what the foolish young man perceived as desirable is going to cost him dearly, and could even cost him his life. So the woman sees her target and surprises him with aggressive, overt invitations to sin. And here she continues to portray her bedroom using tempting words, soon leading to even more blatant reference to illicit sex. Myrrh is a sweet-smelling gum produced from small trees in Arabia. Aloes are plants which grow on the island in the Red Sea. And when these decay, they emit a pleasant fragrance. It just smells wonderful. You know, and everything is great. And you know, you think about it, in that day and time, that was a pretty important thing, because hygiene back then was not like hygiene today. And you know, kind of like you take a bath once a year, whether you need it or not. That was kind of the situation these people were in. So, you know, there was a lot of probably unpleasant smells, and something that smells good would be very attractive.
These are this way of the aloe that we use
Right.
to relieve pain or sunburns and such.
And cinnamon from the bark of a tall tree that was used as perfume. You know, cinnamon even to this day smells good. But the thing about it is, if you take oil of cinnamon and put it on your tongue, what does it do? It burns like fire. Okay, so it smells really good, but when you taste it, whew, bad stuff. I mean, it can blister you if you get enough of it on you. It burns so bad. So most likely these perfumes were pretty expensive back in that day and time. So we read that the myrrh was one of the gifts the wise men presented to the infant Jesus out of their treasures, and it was a gift fit for a king. So this was, you know, somebody that had some myrrh around. This was hot stuff. So perhaps the adulterous woman mentioned these three perfumes to make the foolish young man think she was rich and therefore desirable. Not only was she good looking, but she was rich. I mean, you know, what else could a young guy like that want? Beautiful and rich. So unfortunately, as Proverbs 7:22 points out, he took the bait and he followed her. And he valued a few fleeting moments of sin more than the consequences, whether they were earthly or whether they were eternal. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 18. Come, let us take our fill of love until the morning. Let us solace ourselves with loves. So the promiscuous wife of Solomon's lesson about adultery invites the foolish young man to accompany her with the promise of a night that is filled with pleasure. And she has already tempted him with seductive clothing, surprise, flattery, and the promise of a prepared boudoir. This is her private area where that belongs to her. That's her place. It's kind of funny, the word boudoir, if you look at the root term, it means sulking. You know, and it was originally used as a place where somebody would go and sulk. And I thought that was kind of interesting. So using these elements in his tale is one way for Solomon to remind his son of the tactics wicked people will use to tempt others to join in their sin. And as these are dangers which are just as easily applied to women as they do to men, and just as easily to other forms of sin as to adultery. So this is a common theme that sin has all the way around. So using these elements in his tale is one way for Solomon to remind his son of the tactics that people will use to tempt others to join in their sin. Okay, this predatory woman assures her victim that the experience is going to be delightful. This is going to be just a wonderful thing that's going to happen to you. And the love she promises is not divinely sanctioned love, but it's basically shallow lust. And the word translated as love in this verse is diko, or dodi in the Greek. And it relates to a lover or a love token. It's not the type of love, the agape type of love that we read about in John 3:16, where this is the highest form of love in connection with the Father's gift of his Son as our Savior. So we're not talking about a true love situation. We're talking about a lust love type of situation.
The phileo brotherly love either.
It's even worse than that.
It's like surface, that's it.
Right. So the word love in John 3:16 is your agape love, meaning self-sacrificing love. That's not what this woman is talking about here. Agape love puts others' interest above one's own interest, and it always gives and never takes. This is just the opposite of what agape love is. Comments about that verse? Okay, let's look at verses 19 and 20. For the man is not at home, he has gone a long journey, he hath taken a bag of money with him, he will come home at the full moon. So as part of seducing this foolish young man, the adulteress tries to alleviate fears that he might have about entering into an illicit affair with her. She assures him that her husband is on a long journey far from home. He ain't down the street. He's not at work. He's a long way away, so he's not going to come and he's not going to catch him, is what she's trying to tell him. She is not only willing to betray her husband, but is also eager to do it. You know, she has no shame in what she's doing. Her religious observances at the temple were basically meaningless. She had no morals. She had no religion. She willfully scorned God's commandments, thou shalt not commit adultery. Her rush to commit adultery resembles the actions of Potiphar's wife to entice Joseph into an adulterous affair. There's a good parallel here. However, it seems that the adulterous woman was more culpable than Potiphar's wife. The Apostle John reminds us that the unregenerate world with its lust is passing away, but whoever does God's will is going to abide forever. And succumbing to lust may lead to fleeting pleasures, but obeying God's leads to eternal reward. So Potiphar's wife did not have the law of God that was later given to Israel. She wasn't under the law of Moses. This was prior to that. Most people today will never be solicited by a literal prostitute, but the appeal to the lust of the flesh abounds through TV, movies, and the internet. A lot of stuff out there. You watch the old TV shows, and you watch the TV shows today, and even 10 years ago, stuff that's on the TV now wasn't allowed on the TV. It's getting that bad, and you got all the stuff on social media. You got all the stuff in the movies. Anything you want to find on the internet, it's there if you're looking for it. So the adulteress continues her effort to persuade the foolish young man to commit adultery with her. She points out that her husband took a bag of money with him. Well, he's got the money to say he's not going to run out of cash and have to come back home. But again, there's kind of that reference there. Well, she's got a lot of money and stuff because her husband's got a lot of money. She's kind of living off of him. So perhaps she mentions this fact to alleviate the young man's fear that her husband might run out of money and return home unexpectedly. She indicates that he will be far from home for several days until there's a full moon. So, we don't know exactly where in the moon cycle this is, but here's a situation where you can kind of tell by what the moon cycle is how long it's going to be before the husband comes home. And it seems the husband was on a business trip, but may have planned to spend some of his money on a gift or two for his wife. He took some money with him, and if he was a good husband, of course, he's going to bring his wife home something. So if this is the case, his wife wickedness is kind of intensified. Not only, she's playing both sides of the story here. Absolutely. The young man is being drawn into the affair slowly but surely, and this entire story is meant to highlight the dangers of sexual temptation and the tactics to which both men and women can be exposed. So the young man in this example, like the son listening to Solomon's teaching and those reading it today, would be well advised to heed the counsel given in Proverbs 1 and 10. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. And fortunately, God promises to provide a way of escape when temptation confronts us. So we'll stop right there, and we'll pick up next week with verse 21. Appreciate everybody's attention and comments today. Yeah.